The sun beat down mercilessly on the vast Mississippi fields, the hum of cicadas filling the thick summer air. John Davis, a rugged farmer in his mid-50s, wiped his brow as he surveyed his crops. The land stretched endlessly, an ocean of cotton, under a sky that felt as heavy as the weight of the war that had touched every corner of the world. Yet, in this remote part of the South, things seemed unchanged. The war, the chaos, all of it felt far away. But not today. Today it was coming. A convoy of trucks pulled into the yard, carrying with it a group of German women prisoners of war, their faces gaunt and weary from the journey. They had been taken from their homeland, from the battlefields of Europe, and brought here, to the heart of Mississippi, to work on American farms. They were prisoners, yes, but they were still human. And for them, everything about this place would be foreign, from the heat to the food, to the people. As the women disembarked from the trucks, their eyes flickered nervously from side to side, unsure of what awaited them. John, standing on his porch, watched them carefully, noting the fear in their eyes. They had been through enough. They had been taught that Americans were ruthless, that they would be treated with disdain, and worse. But John wasn't that kind of man. He had seen enough hardship in his own life to know that cruelty had no place in the world. He saw them, not as enemies, but as people, broken by the same war that had ravaged his country, and he felt an unexpected sense of responsibility for them. Clara, one of the women, stood out. She was taller than most, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, and though her eyes were shadowed with fear, there was something in her gaze that caught John's attention. She was the one who, despite everything, seemed to hold herself with some semblance of dignity. As the women were led toward the barracks, John called out to them. "Come, take a break," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. His words hung in the air, carrying an unexpected warmth. Clara hesitated, unsure whether she was being mocked or if this was another trick. She looked to the other women, then back at John. He wasn't like the others. There was something different about him. He reached into the cooler beside him, pulled out a large glass pitcher, and began to pour something into a set of metal cups. It was sweet tea, the kind of drink that defined the South, the kind of drink that could cool the burn of a hot Mississippi afternoon. "It's just tea," John said, offering it to Clara. "Try it. It's good for the heat." Clara's hand trembled slightly as she took the cup from him. The cool glass felt strange against her skin. She didn't trust him. She couldn't trust him. Not after everything. She looked at the tea inside the cup, then back at him. He smiled, his eyes kind, yet somehow knowing. "Don't worry. I'll drink first," he said, lifting his own cup to his lips and taking a long sip. He waited for her to react, to make her choice. Clara's eyes narrowed as she watched him. Her mind raced, filled with suspicion. Was this some kind of test? Some cruel game? But there was nothing in John's eyes that suggested malice. He simply set the cup down and wiped his mouth. "See? No poison," he said with a small chuckle. Clara hesitated, still unsure. But the heat was unbearable, and the thirst in her throat was greater than the fear in her heart. She brought the cup to her lips, took a cautious sip. The sweetness hit her first, the coolness following soon after. It was unlike anything she had ever tasted. She stared at the cup in disbelief, the icy cold tea soothing her dry throat in a way nothing else had in months. Greta, standing beside her, leaned over and whispered, "It's not poison, Clara." Slowly, Clara smiled, the tension in her shoulders loosening for the first time in what felt like years. She looked up at John, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. He gave her a nod, his expression still warm but unreadable. The other women took their cups next, each of them slowly finding relief in the drink, each of them taking small steps toward trusting this strange man in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. They didn't know it yet, but this simple act of kindness was the beginning of something that would change them forever. The war had robbed them of so much, but for the first time since their capture, they felt the faintest flicker of hope. And in that moment, the boundaries of war, of enemy and friend, seemed to fade just a little bit. The heat of the Mississippi summer weighed heavily on the air as Clara and the other women sat under the small shade of an oak tree, resting from their long hours of work. The wide, green fields stretched out in every direction, the cotton plants swaying gently in the breeze. The unfamiliar sound of cicadas filled the silence, an incessant hum that seemed to be the only sound of life around them. The women, tired and broken, had barely spoken since they first arrived, but now, after the unexpected kindness of John Davis, something had shifted. Clara, usually reserved and distrustful, found herself looking over at him more often, seeing him not as a foe, but as a man, a human being. She still couldn't fully trust him, not after everything, but the taste of the sweet tea had left an impression. The walls she had built around herself were beginning to crack, just a little. As the days passed, the routine of hard labor and tense silence began to take shape. The women worked in the fields, planting and picking cotton under the watchful eyes of the American guards. But with each passing day, there was something different in the air. The guards, though still distant, were not as harsh as Clara had expected. The work was exhausting, but it was fair. And there were moments, like today, when they were given a break to rest and recover, something they hadn't experienced in the camps. It was during one of these breaks that Clara first noticed the kindness that John Davis showed. He would occasionally bring them food, simple meals like bread and butter, or even fruit, something they hadn't had in so long. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Clara question everything she had been taught. The stereotype of the cruel American soldier, the brutal enemy, began to fade as she watched John interact with the women. He wasn't perfect, far from it, but he treated them with a level of respect that she hadn't expected. He didn't look at them as prisoners, but as people. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Clara. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Clara sat alone by the edge of the field, staring at the sky. The war felt far away, almost like a distant dream. She thought of her home in Germany, of her family, of everything she had lost. But in this moment, under the vast Mississippi sky, it felt like there was a chance for something different, something better. She wasn't sure if it was hope or just exhaustion, but for the first time in a long while, she let herself believe that maybe there could be peace, even if just for a fleeting moment. John approached her quietly, holding a small basket with some fruit he had picked from his garden. "I thought you might like this," he said, offering it to her with a small, kind smile. Clara hesitated, unsure of how to respond. It was the first time he had approached her like this, without any official reason, just to offer something out of kindness. She took the fruit, her fingers brushing against his as she did. There was something different in his gaze, something soft, something that made her chest tighten. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at the fruit in her hand. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Thank you," she said quietly. It was all she could manage, but it was enough. John nodded and gave her a small, understanding smile. "You're welcome," he said simply, before turning and walking back to his house. Clara watched him go, feeling a strange warmth spread through her. It was a small moment, but it meant more than she could say. As the days continued, Clara found herself slowly adjusting to the rhythm of this strange new life. The days were still long, the work still exhausting, but there was a softness to the routine that hadn't been there before. She began to speak more with the other women, sharing small stories about their lives before the war. And every now and then, she would catch a glimpse of John, working in his fields or walking past the barracks, his figure a reminder that there was kindness in the world, even in the midst of everything. But as the war raged on, Clara couldn't escape the feeling that something was changing. She could feel it in the air, in the way the American soldiers spoke to each other, in the way John would sometimes pause, his eyes distant, as if lost in thought. It was as though the world was on the edge of something that neither she nor the others could control. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to wonder what would happen when the war ended, when everything was over. Would she return home? Or would she stay here, in this strange land, with people who had shown her more kindness than she ever could have imagined? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she watched the sun set behind the fields, casting a golden light over the land. She didn't have answers, but for the first time, she felt like it was okay to ask the questions. It was the beginning of a change, a shift that would ripple through everything she thought she knew about the world, about herself, and about the people around her. The days in Mississippi seemed to stretch on endlessly, the heat relentless, the fields ever expansive. Clara, Greta, and Anna had grown used to the rhythm of life on the farm. The work was hard, but it was fair. They no longer feared the guards or the uncertainty of their lives as prisoners. There were still moments when the weight of everything felt too much to bear, but those moments were fewer now. Each morning, as the sun rose high, they worked in the fields, bending low to tend the cotton, their fingers raw but steady. It was in these moments, as they labored side by side, that Clara began to understand the quiet strength in the people around her, including John. He never asked for anything in return for his kindness, never made them feel like they owed him. He simply acted, letting his actions speak louder than words. One afternoon, as Clara took a break under the shade of a nearby tree, she found herself thinking about home. It had been months since she had been captured, months since she had been torn away from her family, her life. She had thought of escaping, of running back to Germany, but there was no escape from the war, not for her. Not now. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. It was John, holding a basket of fresh fruit, the same kindness he had shown before. He set it down in front of her and smiled. "I thought you might like a little something sweet," he said, his voice warm but tired. Clara looked at him, unsure of what to say. She had grown used to his presence, but there was still a part of her that didn't know how to respond. She had been taught that kindness could not be trusted, that everything came with a price. But John's kindness was different. It was genuine. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, taking a piece of fruit from the basket. It was sweet, the first truly sweet thing she had tasted in months. She looked at John, her eyes softening. "You don't have to do this," she added. He sat down next to her, his gaze steady. "I know," he said simply, "but I want to. No one deserves to go without kindness." Clara was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had grown so used to being treated like an enemy, like something less than human. But John, this man who had every reason to hate her, was offering her a kindness that was beyond anything she had ever expected. For the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to believe that there was still good in the world. That maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more than survival. As the days passed, Clara found herself drawn more and more to John. Not in the way she had been drawn to men back home, but in the way one might be drawn to someone who offered them hope in a world that seemed hopeless. She didn't understand it, but it didn't matter. She had been through too much to question the small moments of peace that life offered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the fields, Clara found herself standing next to John as they looked out over the land. The warm glow of the evening sun bathed everything in a soft, amber light. It was a moment of stillness, of peace. They stood in silence for a while, just looking out at the world, the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on them. But for a moment, it didn't matter. "I never thought I would find peace here," Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. John glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I don't think any of us expected this," he replied. "But sometimes, peace finds us when we least expect it." Clara turned to him, her gaze meeting his. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the warmth that had been there from the beginning. It was a quiet kind of strength, the kind that didn't need to be spoken, but that Clara had come to trust. "I don't know what happens when this war ends," Clara continued, her voice shaky now. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I have something worth living for." John didn't say anything. He just nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. In that moment, it was as if the weight of the war, the violence, the pain, all of it seemed distant. All that mattered was this fleeting moment of peace, of kindness, of shared humanity. And as the sun set and the evening grew darker, Clara realized that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she had found something here, something that transcended the war, something that made her believe, even if just for a moment, that there was still a chance for redemption. The days in Mississippi grew shorter as the summer heat began to relent, though the work on the farm never did. Clara, Greta, and Anna had settled into their new routine, their hands becoming stronger, their movements more confident as they worked side by side in the fields. The camaraderie between them had deepened, and though they still bore the weight of their captivity, there was a quiet peace in the air now, one they hadn't known since the war began. John continued to treat them with the same kindness, bringing them food and offering small moments of respite during the hardest days. He would often sit with them during breaks, not saying much but always there, his presence a steadying force in a world that had felt unstable for far too long. Clara had come to rely on him in ways she hadn't anticipated. She didn't expect anything more from him than what he offered, but the small gestures, the kind words, the quiet understanding had become a lifeline for her. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in the fields, Clara found herself sitting alone by the barn, looking out at the horizon. The sky was painted with the last traces of the setting sun, the colors deep and rich, stretching across the sky like a canvas. She thought of her home in Germany, of her family, and of the life she had lost. But now, in this moment, she thought about the life she was slowly building here, in this foreign place, among people who had once been strangers. She didn't know how long they would stay here, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a sense of belonging. John found her sitting there, her back against the barn, her gaze lost in the distance. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her, but she noticed him nonetheless. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Clara said, her voice soft as she looked up at the sky. John nodded, sitting beside her. "Yes, it is," he said quietly. "I've seen this view every day for years, but it never gets old." There was a silence between them, comfortable and familiar. Clara turned her gaze back to the horizon, her mind still a whirlwind of thoughts. "I never imagined I'd be here," she said after a moment. "I never imagined I'd be far from home, working on a farm in Mississippi, looking at a sky like this." John chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it, only understanding. "None of us imagined this," he said. "But sometimes life has a way of leading us to unexpected places." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The war had torn her life apart, had forced her onto a path she never would have chosen. But in this moment, sitting beside John, feeling the cool breeze against her skin, she wondered if perhaps she had been led here for a reason. She didn't have the answers, but she knew she was beginning to heal, to find peace in the most unlikely of places. As the evening wore on, the stars began to appear in the sky, faint at first but growing brighter as the night deepened. Clara sat quietly, her thoughts drifting like the stars above her. It was as if, for the first time since she had arrived in America, she could see beyond the war, beyond the pain and loss that had defined her life for so long. She could see a future, even if it was still blurry and uncertain. But it was there, just on the horizon, like the last light of the day. John stood up, stretching his back, and Clara followed his lead. They walked back toward the farmhouse in silence, the quiet of the evening surrounding them. As they approached the door, John stopped and turned to her. "Clara," he said softly. She looked up at him, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "You've been through more than anyone should ever have to endure," he said. "But I want you to know, you're not alone here. You have people who care about you, people who will help you, no matter what." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had never expected this kind of care, not from the people who had once been her captors. But John's words, his sincerity, reached her in a way nothing else had. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done without you." John smiled, a soft, reassuring smile. "You would have made it through," he said. "But I'm glad you don't have to." The warmth of his words wrapped around Clara like a blanket, comforting her in a way she hadn't known she needed. She stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet of the night, feeling the weight of everything she had lost, but also the promise of what could be. As the stars shone brightly above them, Clara realized that, no matter what happened, she would find a way forward. And with John's kindness, maybe she wouldn't have to do it alone. The Mississippi summer was beginning to give way to the cooler winds of fall, but the work on the farm continued relentlessly. Clara had gotten used to the rhythm of the days, waking early with the sun, working the fields, and taking short breaks under the shade of the trees. The quiet peace that had settled over her seemed to linger in the air, wrapping around her like the soft southern breeze. Each day, as the work continued, she felt herself growing stronger, both in body and in spirit. The memory of her life before the war, before everything had changed, still lingered in the back of her mind. But it was no longer the only thing she thought about. There were moments now when she found herself thinking about the future, about the possibility of something more than just surviving. It was during one of these moments, while Clara was walking toward the barn, that she saw John from a distance, working on the fence line, his shirt damp from sweat under the sun. For a brief moment, she just watched him, the way he moved with the easy familiarity of someone who had worked the land his whole life. There was something in the way he worked, a quiet determination that reminded her of the strength she had lost but was slowly finding again. As she approached, John looked up, his face breaking into a smile when he saw her. "Clara," he called out, his voice warm as always. "How's the work going today?" She smiled back, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease just from seeing him. "Same as always," she replied. "It never seems to end, does it?" John chuckled, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "It's the life we live," he said, his tone light but thoughtful. "Always something to do, always work to be done." Clara nodded, taking a step closer. "I'm starting to think I might actually get used to it," she said with a small laugh. "I never thought I'd say that." John's smile softened, and for a moment, he said nothing, just looked at her. Clara felt the silence between them, but it was comfortable, not awkward. It was the kind of silence that comes with knowing someone without needing to say much. Finally, John spoke again. "You've been working hard, Clara," he said quietly. "I can see it. You've come a long way." His words hit her differently than she expected, and for a brief moment, she felt something stir inside her. It wasn't the kind of compliment she was used to, the kind that felt hollow or forced. No, this one felt real. It made her pause, made her consider just how far she had come, how much she had changed in these past few months. She had gone from a woman who was trapped in the hopelessness of war, uncertain of everything, to someone who could find small moments of peace, of strength, even in the most unlikely of places. She hadn't expected any of this. Not the work, not the kindness, not the quiet moments of understanding she shared with John. But somehow, they had all become part of her new reality. "I never thought I'd get here," Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I'm starting to believe that I can. I can make it through this." John nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "You will," he said firmly. "You've already proved you can. The rest of it, well, that'll come when it's ready." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she felt something stir in her chest that wasn't fear or sadness, but something more. It was the faintest flicker of hope. It was a small thing, barely there, but it was real. She had spent so much time hiding from it, from the possibility of a future, from the idea that things could ever get better. But now, she realized, she didn't have to keep running from it. Maybe there was something more for her here. Maybe there was still a chance. As the evening drew near, the two of them stood together, looking out over the fields, the sun sinking lower in the sky, painting the world in shades of orange and purple. Clara felt the weight of the day's work begin to fade, replaced by a sense of quiet satisfaction. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though she could finally take a breath, finally allow herself to think about the future. "I'm grateful for this," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the evening air. "For the peace, for the work, for this chance to heal." John turned to her, his expression soft. "You've earned it," he said. And in that moment, Clara believed him. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it didn't seem so impossible. It seemed like a possibility. And that, for now, was enough. As the weeks passed, the rhythm of life on the farm had settled into a quiet, almost familiar pattern. The once daunting tasks of fieldwork had become routine for Clara, Greta, and Anna. They worked together under the hot sun, their bodies growing stronger from the labor, their minds more at peace with the days as they unfolded. The heavy weight of their captivity had not vanished, but it was becoming easier to breathe, to feel as if there might be a life beyond survival. Clara had come to look forward to the small moments of kindness that John Davis offered. He wasn't just a farmer or a man caught up in the chaos of the war. He was a quiet presence, a constant reminder that there was still good in the world, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. One morning, as Clara sat on the porch, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, she felt the familiar pull of longing. It wasn't the same kind of longing that had haunted her during her first days here. Now, it was something more like hope, a glimmer of something she had almost forgotten. The war had taken so much from her, from all of them, but in this small corner of Mississippi, she was beginning to find pieces of herself again. John came out from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants, and saw her sitting there, staring off into the distance. He paused for a moment before walking over to her, his steps slow and deliberate. "Morning, Clara," he said, his voice warm but with a touch of curiosity. Clara looked up at him, offering a small smile. "Morning," she replied softly. "I was just thinking." "About what?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Clara hesitated, unsure if she wanted to voice the thoughts that had been running through her mind. But there was something in John's quiet demeanor that made her feel as though she could trust him. "About what happens next," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After the war. What happens when we go back home, if we even can?" John was silent for a moment, and for the first time, Clara noticed the weariness in his eyes. It wasn't the kind of weariness she had seen in the soldiers or even the other prisoners, but a deeper kind. It was the weariness of a man who had lived through more than his fair share of hardship, who had seen too much, and who still carried it with him. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice low. "I don't know what comes next for any of us. But I think it's about finding a way to live with what we have, right here and now. It's not perfect, but it's something." Clara nodded slowly, taking in his words. There was a truth in them that resonated deeply within her. She had spent so much time worrying about what would happen after the war, about the future that seemed so uncertain, that she had forgotten to appreciate the small things, the moments of peace that she had found in this strange new world. "You're right," she said softly. "I've been so focused on what's lost, what's gone, that I've forgotten to notice what's here." John looked at her, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It's easy to do," he said. "The world doesn't make it easy to hold on to the small things, the quiet moments. But they're there, if you look for them." The words settled between them, a comfortable silence filling the space as the morning light grew stronger. Clara didn't know what the future held, or if there would be a future at all beyond the war. But in this moment, as she sat beside John, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in a long time. The war had taken so much from her, but it hadn't taken everything. And here, in this place, she was starting to reclaim the pieces of herself that she thought were lost forever. As the days continued to pass, Clara found herself focusing less on the uncertainty of the future and more on the present. There were still hard days, moments when the weight of everything she had endured threatened to pull her under, but those moments were fewer now. She was learning to appreciate the small things, the feeling of the sun on her skin, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the quiet companionship of the people around her. One afternoon, as Clara worked in the fields with Greta, she found herself laughing, the sound foreign but welcome. It was the kind of laugh that came from deep within, a true moment of joy that had been absent for so long. Greta looked at her, surprised, and then smiled. "What's so funny?" she asked. Clara shook her head, still grinning. "I don't know. It just feels good to laugh," she said. Greta smiled, her eyes softening. "It's good for you," she said. "We all need to laugh more." Clara nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time, she felt like she was truly living again, not just surviving. As the seasons slowly changed, Clara began to feel as though she was finding a new life in this foreign land, a life she never could have imagined when she first arrived. And as she stood in the fields one evening, watching the sunset with John by her side, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the war, more to life than what had been taken from her. Maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for after all. The air had cooled slightly, the crispness of early autumn making its way into Mississippi. The mornings were more comfortable now, the heat of the summer finally giving way to something gentler. The work in the fields continued as always, but there was a difference in Clara this time. She no longer walked through the motions, her hands moving automatically as she picked cotton or tended to the plants. There was a quiet determination in her now, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. The weight of the war, the fear of the unknown, seemed lighter. It wasn't that the past had disappeared, but it no longer controlled her every thought. As the days passed, she found herself looking at the world around her in a new light. The sky, once so far away and unreachable, now seemed to open up with possibilities. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, unyielding, as if it would carry her forward, no matter what. One evening, as Clara finished up her work in the fields, she saw John walking toward her. His figure was framed by the fading sunlight, his usual quiet confidence in his steps. He had been working the land for years, and yet there was always something new in the way he moved, a steady calm that had become a lifeline for her. He was a constant in a world that had felt so unstable for so long. "You've been working hard, Clara," John said as he approached, a small smile on his face. His voice was always kind, but today it held something more, a weight of unspoken understanding. Clara wiped her hands on her work shirt and looked at him, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "I suppose I have," she said. "But it feels different now, in a good way." John's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was silence between them. The kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but one that spoke volumes. He nodded slowly, as though he understood exactly what she meant. "It's been a long road," he said quietly. "But you're stronger now, Clara. I can see it." Clara felt something tighten in her chest at his words. She had heard them before, but hearing them now, from him, made her believe them. She had come so far from the frightened woman who had first stepped onto this farm, unsure of what the days ahead would bring. She was no longer just surviving. She was living, and that was something she hadn't expected. "I never thought I would get here," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not after everything that happened. But now I feel like I have a chance. A real chance." John looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've always had that chance," he said, his voice steady. "Sometimes, we just need to believe it for ourselves." Clara nodded, her gaze falling to the ground for a moment as she took in his words. She had spent so much of her life believing that the war had taken everything from her, that the pieces of herself she had lost would never be found again. But now, in this quiet corner of Mississippi, she was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild. Maybe the pieces she had thought were lost were still there, waiting to be put back together. As the days turned into weeks, Clara found herself more at peace with the world around her. She no longer felt the weight of the past bearing down on her at every moment. The fear of the future, the uncertainty of what would happen when the war finally ended, no longer consumed her. She had learned to live in the present, to find joy in the small moments, in the simple things. The way the wind rustled through the trees in the morning, the smell of fresh bread baking in the farmhouse, the quiet conversations she shared with Greta and Anna as they worked together. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One afternoon, as Clara sat on the porch of the farmhouse, her gaze drifting out over the land, she heard John's footsteps behind her. He had been working in the fields, his shirt dusted with the earth from the land he tended so carefully. She turned to him as he approached, her eyes meeting his. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice gentle. Clara smiled softly, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. "Just thinking," she said. "About everything. About how far we've all come." John sat down next to her, his presence familiar and comforting. "We've come a long way," he agreed, his gaze following hers as it wandered over the fields. "But we've still got a ways to go. The road ahead might not be easy, but it's ours to walk." Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. The future was still uncertain, but it was hers to shape, to define. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the land, and Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to walk it. Not with John by her side, not with Greta and Anna, and not with the strength she had found within herself. The war had taken so much from her, but it hadn't taken everything. And for that, she was grateful. The crisp autumn air seemed to breathe new life into the farm. Clara had grown used to the stillness of the mornings, the quiet of the world before the day began in earnest. The rustling of leaves and the sound of distant birds filled the air, signaling the change of seasons. It wasn't just the weather that had changed, though. Clara herself had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Her hands were strong now. The work in the fields had sculpted her body into something more resilient, and her heart, once so fragile, was beginning to heal. She had found a sense of peace here, in this strange, foreign place. It wasn't the peace she had once imagined, the kind that would come after the war was over. It was a quieter kind, one that came in small, everyday moments, in the laughter of Greta and Anna, in the shared meals, in the way John's steady presence made her feel safe. Clara had learned to take each day as it came. She no longer spent her nights lying awake, imagining the worst. The future, though still uncertain, didn't feel as heavy anymore. There was a sense of hope in the air, something she had almost forgotten existed. It wasn't that the war had gone away, or that everything had magically become perfect. No, the scars of the past remained, but Clara had learned how to live with them. One afternoon, as she was walking back to the farmhouse after finishing her work in the fields, she noticed John sitting on the porch, a familiar smile playing on his lips as he looked up at her. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. For a moment, Clara stood there, just looking at him, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't known was possible. "You're looking more relaxed these days," John said, his voice warm, as she approached him. Clara smiled and shrugged, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. "It's been a long road, but I think I'm getting there," she said quietly. John nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can see that," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "You've come a long way, Clara. From the woman who arrived here in fear, to the woman who stands here now, steady and strong." Clara felt something stir inside her, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. She had never expected this. She had never expected to find peace, or strength, or anything that resembled the life she had once known. But somehow, despite everything, she had found it here, in the most unlikely of places. She sat down beside him, feeling the warmth of the porch against her back. The world was quieter now, the soft sounds of the evening filling the air. The sun was almost gone, but the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the colors stretching out across the horizon. It was beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, Clara could truly appreciate it. "It's strange," she said after a moment, her voice soft. "I used to think I couldn't survive this, that I couldn't make it through the war, through everything I've lost. But now I feel like I'm starting to live again." John looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You've always had the strength inside you," he said quietly. "Sometimes it just takes time for us to find it." Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from something else, something she couldn't quite explain. She had spent so many months buried in grief and fear, but now, she felt as if the weight of it was finally starting to lift. She wasn't the same person she had been when she arrived here. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For helping me find my way." John reached out and gently placed his hand on hers, a simple gesture, but one that meant more than words could express. "You did it, Clara," he said softly. "You found your way. I'm just glad I could be here to see it." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of it in her own. She wasn't sure what the future held, or what would happen when the war ended. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She knew she could face whatever came next, as long as she had the strength she had found here, and the people who cared for her. The evening stretched on, the stars beginning to twinkle above them, and Clara felt a peace she had never known. It was a peace that came from within, from the quiet certainty that, no matter what had been taken from her, there was still something worth holding on to. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that the road ahead, though uncertain, might not be so frightening after all. The days continued to pass peacefully on the farm, the early autumn breeze now a welcomed relief after the summer heat. Clara, Greta, and Anna had become accustomed to the routine of the fields, the steady rhythm of their hands working the land a comforting presence in their lives. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it had given Clara something she hadn't expected: purpose. Each day, as the sun rose and set, she found herself moving through life with more clarity than she had in months, her mind no longer consumed by the fear and uncertainty of the past. The shadow of the war, though still present, no longer dominated every thought, and Clara had come to see that the life she was living now, quiet, simple, and steady, was a gift in its own right. One evening, as Clara and John worked together in the barn, fixing the roof, their hands brushing occasionally as they worked side by side, Clara caught herself thinking about how much had changed. She was no longer the frightened woman who had arrived, uncertain of what the future held, but someone who had learned to find strength in the small moments. The farm had become her home, a place where she could heal, where she could rebuild the pieces of herself that the war had torn apart. As they finished the last of the repairs, John turned to her, his face warm with the satisfaction of the job well done. "I think that's the last of it," he said, wiping his brow. Clara smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment in the air. "It looks good," she said, her voice light. John nodded, his gaze shifting to the horizon as the last light of the day faded away. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said quietly. Clara stood beside him, her eyes following his gaze to the setting sun. "Yes, we have," she agreed, feeling the weight of his words. The past seemed so far behind them now, the fear and the uncertainty that had defined so much of their time together slowly fading into the distance. They had both changed, both in ways they hadn't expected, and now, standing there together, the world felt a little less daunting. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They were enough. In the days that followed, Clara found herself spending more time with John, not just working together, but talking, sharing small stories about their lives before the war, about their hopes for the future. She had never been one for small talk, but with him, it was easy. There was something about his steady presence, something about the way he made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for more. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch of the farmhouse, the sun casting a golden light over the land, Clara turned to John, her heart suddenly feeling full in a way it hadn't before. "John," she began, her voice tentative, "what do you think happens after all this? When the war is over, what happens to us?" John looked at her, his expression calm, his eyes thoughtful. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think the most important thing is that we live our lives now. Right here, right now. We can't control the future, but we can choose how we live today." Clara nodded slowly, his words sinking deep into her. She had spent so long thinking about the future, about what would happen when the war ended, that she had almost forgotten to live in the present. But now, standing on this quiet farm, with the sun setting and the world at peace, she felt something shift inside her. "You're right," she said softly. "Maybe it's enough just to be here, just to be alive." John smiled, the warmth in his expression making Clara's heart flutter. "It's more than enough," he said. "It's everything." As the days turned into weeks, Clara continued to work the land, her hands steady and strong. She no longer feared the future, and though the war still loomed in the distance, she found that the life she had built here, with John and the others, was enough to keep her grounded. She had found her strength, her peace, and in the quiet moments of shared laughter, in the steady rhythm of daily life, Clara realized that maybe the future wasn't something to be feared after all. It was something to be lived together. And as the sun set each evening, casting its golden light over the fields, Clara knew that, no matter what happened next, she would face it with the same quiet strength that had carried her this far. The war had taken much, but it hadn't taken everything. And for that, she was grateful. The days began to blur together as the seasons shifted. The once harsh sun of summer had softened, and the cool autumn air now wrapped the farm in a calm, peaceful embrace. Clara had learned to move with the rhythms of the land, to wake each morning with purpose, and to take each step forward without hesitation. There was still a lingering sense of loss, a shadow that followed her, but it was no longer all-consuming. She had found a kind of balance now, one that had eluded her for so long. Her hands, strong from months of work, no longer trembled as they had when she first arrived. The weight of her past was still there, but it no longer felt as heavy. The farm had become more than just a place to survive. It had become a sanctuary, a place to heal. Clara's relationship with John had grown too, though it remained quiet and steady. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic moments of change, but there was an undeniable connection between them, one that had been built slowly, with each shared moment, each small act of kindness. One evening, as Clara sat on the porch, watching the last light of day fade into twilight, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was John. He had become a constant in her life, his presence as familiar as the landscape itself. "Evening," he said, his voice soft as he sat down beside her. "Evening," Clara replied, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. The sky was a deep blue now, the stars beginning to twinkle faintly in the distance. "You ever think about home?" John asked after a moment, his voice quieter than usual. Clara paused, the question catching her off guard. She had thought about it, of course. She had thought about her family, her life before the war, the life she had lost. But she hadn't thought about it in a while, not like this. She looked over at him, her gaze meeting his. "Sometimes," she said softly, "but not in the way I used to. I don't know. I guess I've come to terms with it." John nodded, his expression unreadable. He didn't press her, didn't ask for more. It was as if he understood, as if he knew that words weren't always necessary. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. Clara felt the quiet comfort of his presence, the sense of safety that had come to mean so much to her. She hadn't expected any of this. When she had first arrived on the farm, she had expected to simply endure, to survive. But now, as she sat beside John, watching the stars above, she realized she had found something more than that. She had found peace. The days continued to pass, and with each one, Clara found herself growing more and more at ease in this new life. There were still challenges, of course, but they were different now. They no longer seemed insurmountable. The work in the fields, though hard, was something she could do. The bonds she had formed with Greta and Anna were strong, built on shared experience and mutual understanding. And the connection with John, though quiet, was one that she could feel in every glance, every smile, every small gesture of care. One afternoon, as Clara worked with Anna in the fields, she found herself smiling for no particular reason. It was the kind of smile that came from simply feeling content, from knowing that, for the first time in a long while, she had found a place where she could truly belong. Anna looked over at her, a small grin forming on her face. "What's got you smiling?" she asked, her voice teasing but not unkind. Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "Just thinking," she said, "about how far we've all come." Anna raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You know, I've noticed that," she said thoughtfully. "You're different, Clara. In a good way." Clara didn't know how to respond at first. She had changed, that was true, but it wasn't something she had really thought about until now. She had spent so much time trying to move forward, trying to find a way through the grief and the uncertainty, that she hadn't realized just how much she had grown. "I guess I have," Clara said finally, her voice quieter. "It's been hard, but I'm starting to see that maybe there's more to life than just surviving." Anna smiled, her eyes warm. "There's always more," she said softly. "You just have to find it." Clara nodded, the truth of Anna's words settling deep in her. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about finding those moments of joy, those moments of peace, even in the most unlikely of places. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt ready to embrace whatever the future might bring, knowing that she had already found something worth holding on to. The days seemed to blend into one another as Clara continued to adapt to her new life on the farm. The steady rhythm of work, the simplicity of the life she was living, had become her comfort. Every day, as she woke up with the sun and set out to the fields, she felt herself growing stronger. There was still a quiet ache inside her, the memories of her life before the war, but it didn't consume her anymore. Instead, it was just another part of her, something she could live with, something that no longer defined her every thought. She had become someone new, someone who had learned to embrace the present, to find peace in the small moments of life. The bond between her and John had grown too. Their relationship was quiet but steady, the kind that didn't require grand gestures or words. It was in the way they shared the work, the way they spent their evenings sitting together on the porch, watching the stars come out as the day faded. John had been there for her, in ways she hadn't known she needed, and now, as they shared the quiet of the evening, she realized how much he had come to mean to her. It wasn't love in the way she had once understood it, but it was something else, something that ran deeper than she had imagined. One afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the trees, Clara found herself sitting outside, her legs stretched out in front of her, her mind quiet. The work was done for the day, and there was nothing left to do but rest. The soft sound of the wind rustling through the leaves was the only noise around her, the world feeling still and calm. It was in these moments that she felt most at peace, when everything seemed to slow down, when the weight of the world didn't seem so heavy. John walked over to her, his footsteps light against the grass. He had been working in the fields all day, his shirt damp with sweat, his face tired but content. He sat down beside her without a word, the two of them sharing the silence without needing to speak. Clara looked at him, noticing how the light from the setting sun made his features softer, more relaxed. You know, she began, her voice quiet. I never thought I would be here, doing this. I never imagined I'd find peace in a place like this, with people like you. John turned to her, his expression thoughtful. It's not what we imagined, he said softly. But sometimes, the best things are. The ones we don't plan for. Clara smiled, his words resonating deeply within her. It was true. She had spent so much time focused on what she had lost, on the life she would never get back, that she had almost forgotten to look at what she had now. This farm, these people, the quiet moments with John, they were more than enough. They were everything she needed. I think I'm starting to see that, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not perfect, but maybe that's okay. John nodded, his eyes meeting hers. It's more than okay, he said, his voice steady. Sometimes, the imperfections are what make life worth living. Clara felt a warmth spread through her at his words, a sense of peace settling deep inside her. She didn't need everything to be perfect. She didn't need the past to be different. What she needed was right here, in this moment, on this farm, with these people who had become her family. The work, the quiet moments, the laughter shared between friends, they were enough. They were everything. The wind shifted, the temperature dropping slightly as the evening drew near, and Clara pulled her jacket tighter around her. She didn't want this moment to end. There was something comforting about the stillness, something grounding about the way the world seemed to slow down as the sun set. John sat next to her, his presence solid and reassuring. They didn't need to say anything more. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to question. The war was still there, lingering in the background of their lives, but it no longer defined them. They had found a way to live beyond it, to find peace in the chaos. Clara looked up at the stars, the sky now dark and filled with countless points of light, and she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in a long time, she felt ready to move forward. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was here, in this moment, and that was enough. I think I'm ready, Clara said softly, almost to herself. John turned to her, his expression gentle, but there was something more in his eyes now, a quiet understanding. Ready for what? He asked, his voice calm. Clara took a deep breath, the words coming easily now. Ready to let go of the past. Ready to face whatever comes next. John smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and nodded. I think you already have, he said. The two of them sat there, side by side, watching the stars above, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The seasons had begun to change once again, the crisp bite of winter slowly creeping into the air, replacing the warmth of autumn. The days were shorter now, the nights longer, and with each passing moment, Clara found herself reflecting more on the life she had slowly begun to build on the farm. She had found solace here, in this place that had once felt so foreign, and yet now felt like home. The land, the work, the people, everything had come together in a way that she hadn't expected, and now, as winter settled in, she realized just how much she had grown. The farm, with its steady rhythm, had become the anchor she needed. Her days were still filled with hard work, but now it wasn't a struggle to get through each day. The weight of the past, though still there, no longer controlled her. Clara could breathe now, really breathe, without feeling the constant pressure of what had been lost. It was in the quiet moments, the small pauses between tasks, that Clara felt the most at peace. The warmth of the farmhouse, the sound of the crackling fire in the hearth, the soft murmur of conversation between Greta and Anna as they worked together, all of it brought her a sense of comfort. She had never imagined that such simple things could feel so fulfilling. It was during one of these quiet moments, as the wind howled outside, that Clara found herself sitting by the fire, lost in thought. The year had come to an end, and with it, so many questions. What would happen when the war ended? Would she return to Germany? Or would this life, this small corner of Mississippi, become her future? She didn't know. And yet, she wasn't afraid of the uncertainty anymore. The farm had taught her that there was strength in the unknown, that even in times of uncertainty, there was still peace to be found. John had been a steady presence throughout all of this. They had spent months working together, sharing quiet moments, slowly learning about one another. There were no grand gestures between them, no sweeping confessions, but Clara felt something deep for him, something real. It wasn't love in the way she had known it before, but it was something that filled the space between them. something that made her believe that maybe, after everything she had been through, she could still find something good. She looked across the room to where John sat, his face illuminated by the firelight. He was reading, as he often did in the evenings, his eyes focused on the page, but there was a calmness in his demeanor that she found comforting. "John," Clara said softly, breaking the quiet of the room. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers with a small, gentle smile. "What is it?" he asked, his voice warm. Clara hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. But there was something about the way John looked at her, something that made her feel safe. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but soft. "About everything. About this life, and how much I've changed." John set the book aside, giving her his full attention. "How so?" he asked, his voice gentle, as if he already knew the answer. Clara paused, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "When I first came here, I didn't know if I could survive. I was so lost, so consumed by everything that had happened. But now, I'm starting to realize that I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living, and I didn't expect that." John nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I think that's the hardest part," he said quietly. "Realizing that it's not about just getting through, it's about finding something to live for, even when it feels impossible." Clara looked at him, his words resonating deep within her. It was true. She had spent so much time focusing on what had been lost, what could never be regained, that she had forgotten what it meant to truly live. But now, she felt it. This quiet joy in the small moments, the everyday things that made life worth living. "I never imagined that I would find peace here," Clara said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "But I have, and I think that's enough." John's expression softened, and for a moment, they sat in silence, the warmth of the fire filling the room, the stillness of the world outside wrapping around them. Clara felt something shift. In her, something that made her believe that she could move forward, no matter what the future held. The war had taken so much, but it hadn't taken everything. And now, as she sat there, surrounded by the quiet peace of the farm, she realized that she had found something worth holding on to. John reached over, his hand resting gently on hers, a simple gesture, but one that meant more than words could express. "You found it, Clara," he said quietly. "You found peace, and that's all anyone can really ask for." Clara smiled, her heart full. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. The winter months settled in with a quiet grace, the chill in the air marking the end of another year. The farm, now familiar and comforting, stood strong against the cold winds, a place where Clara had learned to live once more. The days were quieter now, the work slower as the fields rested. It was a time of reflection, a time to look back on everything that had happened since she first arrived. Clara often found herself sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky with soft shades of pink and purple. It was in these quiet moments that she allowed herself to think, to appreciate how far she had come. The fears that once held her captive, the uncertainty that had clouded her mind, had all but faded away. She had learned to accept what had happened, to make peace with the parts of her life that were beyond her control. She was no longer the frightened woman who had stepped off the truck all those months ago. Now, she was someone different, stronger, steadier, and more certain of herself. The farm had given her that. It had given her the space to heal, to rebuild. As the days went by, the bond between Clara and John deepened. They shared more moments together, the connection between them growing without words. There were no grand gestures, no declarations of love. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a shared strength that had been forged in the simplicity of the life they led. They didn't need to speak about the past. They both understood the weight it carried. What mattered now was the present, the life they had built together. One evening, as the winter wind howled outside, Clara and John sat by the fire in the farmhouse, the warmth from the hearth comforting them both. The world outside felt distant, as if it belonged to a time before. Here, in this small space, there was only the present, only the flickering flames and the quiet of the evening. "It's hard to believe how much has changed," Clara said softly, her eyes fixed on the fire. "How much I've changed." John glanced at her, his expression steady but kind. "We all change, Clara," he said quietly. "The world changes us, whether we want it to or not." Clara nodded, her thoughts drifting. "I think the hardest part was letting go of the past," she admitted. "I spent so much time holding on to it, thinking that I couldn't move forward, that I couldn't survive without it. But now, I realize that moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It just means finding a way to live with what happened." John didn't respond immediately, but his gaze softened, and Clara could feel the understanding in his silence. He had been there, through the quiet moments, through the work and the struggle. They had both seen the worst of what life could throw at them, and yet, here they were, alive, together, and at peace. Clara's heart swelled with a quiet sense of gratitude. She had found something she hadn't expected: hope. It wasn't a loud, bright thing. It wasn't something that would come with a grand announcement. But it was there, quietly pulsing in the background of her life, in the moments she shared with John, in the strength she had found in herself, in the peaceful stillness of the farm. "You've given me something," Clara said after a pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've given me the chance to live again, to find peace, to find myself." John turned to her, his expression open, and for a moment, their gazes met, a silent understanding passing between them. "You found it, Clara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It was always inside you." Clara smiled, the words settling in her heart. She knew that he was right. She had always had the strength within her. It had just taken time, and the right place, for her to find it. The future still remained uncertain. The world still held its unknowns. But for the first time in a long time, Clara wasn't afraid of it. She didn't need to know what would happen tomorrow or the next day. What mattered was that she was here, living, breathing, and finding peace in the small things. And with that, she realized that she had everything she needed. The fire crackled in the hearth, and as the night stretched on, Clara felt the weight of the world lift, if only for a moment. She was exactly where she was meant to be,